Hey, everyone, this is Andy Hall. All of us, we're going to have a lot of fun. We're going to learn some things. We're going to hear some stories. And with me today is Jenna Belk for the best advice ever. Of course, the best advice ever is a show where awesome people come on and talk about the best advice they ever got. Jenna, for those of you who are not acquainted with her work, is a YouTuber and an activist. She does gaggles of shows. Did I say gaggles? I'm going to use that. I'm going to use that word, gaggles of shows. I was just on a show that she co-hosts with Ethan Michaels the other day, and we talked about mental health. I know you've been on the Atheist Experience too. You have your own YouTube channel. Jenna, enough about me talking about you. Let's have you talk about you. For people who aren't acquainted with you and your work, talk about yourself.
Well, my name is Jenna Belk, and I started volunteering for the ACA in December of 2018, and that was kind of what started my activism, where I started volunteering for the Atheist Experience and other shows that they put on, and then started becoming a YouTuber and activist myself. So
cool. I was taking a look at your channel, Jenna Belk, and I saw that you had just talked with Dr. David Kyle Johnson the other day.
Mm-hmm.
That guy is brilliant. That's what
he's so great. He's for those who don't know, he's a professor on the great courses. He's also a professor at a university where he is, and he's got courses on philosophy and on sci-fi. So he's got kind of a broad range of subjects in his head. He's just so great at explaining it in a way that you can really keep up. You can really appreciate what he says. I love talking to him.
Yeah. He explains things so that even I can understand them. And that's a feat unto itself, Jenna.
That's how I felt too.
Right. So, I was looking at your channel. You do a whole bunch of things on your channel.
Yes. Well, it started out just doing the Atheist Experience, and doing that, I started meeting people who did their own shows. And so then that kind of got me thinking, well, what kind of shows would I do? And I can't decide. So I've just decided to do everything that I can as I can do it. And now I'm doing, so I started with Atheist Stasis, where I'm interviewing people and trying to get a new perspective on life, because I found out that I live in a world that I didn't understand, that I didn't realize existed. I was living in kind of a Neverland version. And so I was like, okay, well, now I've got some things to learn. So I wanted to learn from not only people with PhDs like Dr. David Kyle Johnson, but also friends, peers, different kinds of people, because I found out that every perspective matters, not just people who've been deemed, worthy by an institution. So just kind of started with that.
I think that's a great place to pivot to the best advice you ever heard.
Yeah. So actually, kind of at the beginning of all this, before I went to the ACA, I had gotten married. And so I actually got a tattoo a couple of days after my wedding that was happily ever after on my foot, because I was under the impression that was like the end game. That's the ultimate peak of life, right? Is marriage. And so then I kind of just kept living, and found out that I had an alcohol problem. Actually, I kind of jumped ahead a little bit. Let me rewind because I jumped ahead. So actually, before I got married, I was in a relationship, and my partner had an alcohol problem that we had just found out about. I didn't realize, I didn't know anything about addiction or alcoholism. I didn't know what to do. And I just kept asking everybody I could think of, well, what do I do? How do I help? How do I, what can I do to fix this? Because I feel so helpless. And his uncle actually came up to me out of the blue, and I just remember he just reached out and just grabbed me, and he looked at me and he said, "You need to go to Al-Anon." I was like, "What's that?" Okay, I'll go. What is that? I'm totally down. So I ended up going and kind of went into my first meeting. Al-Anon is like for support, people who support people going through AA. So if you're the mother of an alcoholic, or you're the spouse or friend or sibling, anybody that cares about anybody going through an addiction problem, you can go to Al-Anon. So I go to Al-Anon and I'm sitting in my first class and I'm like, okay, well, this is what I was told to do to figure out how I can help. So I'm going to learn how to help here. I'm sitting there and I'm like, okay, what can I do? And I'm listening to the ladies in that group, and they're all talking about themselves. Like, none of them are talking about what they're doing to help the people that they're there for. And I'm like, so what can I do, like, to help him? And they're like, nothing. And I'm like, no, I was told I could come here to find out what I can do to help. And they're like, you can help yourself. And I was like, no, that's not what I'm looking for. But it was huge. I mean, I guess that's kind of a 2-part best advice ever, but those 2 things were huge.
Yeah. It's, is that your cat?
Yes.
No, that's great. It is something that I think a lot of us struggle with, is feeling powerless in situations that, especially with loved ones, right?
Well, you're under the impression that you can do anything to help anyone. Just force yourself. It's like, I don't know.
So once you heard the advice, how long did it take for you to wrap your mind and your heart around that?
Months. It took a lot of meetings to get through that. And I think that once I finally did, I was able to discover my own alcohol problem. And that's kind of why I jumped forward. Yeah.
It's funny. I was just reading, what it is. It's about people and how we don't, it's self-discovery. We're all on a journey of self-discovery. And then you just find out things about yourself that you didn't realize was there. Stephen King didn't realize he was an alcoholic until the bottle bill passed in Maine, and he had to bring all these bottles back. And it's like, wow, there's a lot of beer bottles here, and it's only been a few days. So that's how the point of epiphany for him. Was it in a session that you came to the realization, Jenna?
I would say that it was, that first session was kind of the shock. Like that can't be all I can do. And I just, oh man, I probably just sat on that, but I just kept going back, and I was like, no, there's gotta be more people I can talk to. There's gotta be different points of view.
Yeah. So once you figured out, once you realized that there was nothing you could do for the other person, did you look for things that you could do for yourself?
I finally was allowed, I was finally exposed to people that were able to help themselves, despite usually it was partner, people who go to Al-Anon, their partner's addictions. And I think that was kind of how I started this way of trying to be just living by example. And I think that that's kind of how I'm becoming the person that I'm becoming, is because I don't want to do things just because somebody else told me to do them, or somebody else told me that that's the way that I should be doing them. I want to be doing things because I learned from someone, or I witnessed something, or I usually learn better by example, by watching other people. And so it's kind of, why not try actually living that way?
Yeah. Sorry,
I'm gonna let my cat out real quick.
That's okay. What kind of cat do you have?
A fat orange tabby.
Oh, you got the ultimate kind of cat. This is the
Yeah.
cat that I would aspire to have, or to be, enjoying my life with. My girlfriend and I just moved just at the beginning of the pandemic, and we haven't had a chance to get a cat or a dog yet, but we plan to. We were talking the other day. I was on your show, and I have experience, working with people with disabilities,
Right.
and one of the things that I say to other staff, that I've said to other staff people, and things that I try to remind myself of, is that I have absolutely no control over. I cannot control other people's behavior. There is no Jedi mind trick. There is, and trying to control other people's behavior is just going to make me go crazy. What I can do is influence how I portray myself and who I am, and try to be a person that provides as good an example as I humanly can.
Yeah. I had a thought, but I lost it. I'm sorry.
That's okay. That's okay. You were just talking about going to support groups, and they're for those of us who really do try to be responsible. I think it's easy not to look for help, right, for ourselves, and just going out there and finding support. That just from us just talking right now, it's like I was reflecting. It's like, there were probably points in my life I could have benefited from a support group, but I never thought about it. Literally not thought about it until just now, talking with you about the idea about seeking some kind of assistance that isn't like a one-on-one therapy, but more of peers.
I found that there's it seems to be a need, kind of depending on the situation, depending on so many things. Like, I found benefit in AA in showing me things that I recognize in myself, but by witnessing it in others. So that's kind of how I discovered that I was actually an alcoholic, was going to an AA meeting. And listening to the stories that the women were sharing and being like, oh, I've done that. I've done that too. And so like, okay, if I'm relating to all of these women, I must be an alcoholic. And so that kind of thing really helped me. But then it wasn't AA that got me sober. It was AA that got me to rehab, and rehab got me sober, but then it wasn't rehab that got me to stay sober. So it's kind of just depends. It seems there must be some kind of a combination that's got to be helpful to people, group therapy, single therapy, actual like classes.
Right. What do you think helped you the most when you got out of rehab? If you're going to say that this was probably the most important things that helped you stay sober, what do you think it was?
One day at a time.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
The fact that one thing that I learned in rehab that really, really helped me, that I took, was kind of what you had mentioned earlier, that the fact that I have absolutely, and they had to put it in extreme terms, absolutely zero control over anything except for what I'm doing and feeling right now. That's all that I have control over. And I'm like, well, when you narrow it down that much for me, that limits everything else. I'm like, oh, well, I don't have control over that. Don't have control over that. It makes life so much easier. And I'm just like, well, I have control over what I'm doing right now. So what do I not want to do right now? Drinks. So what should I do instead? Let's find something to do instead.
Are you trying to tell me that it's not healthy to go back and think about history and to dwell on that? And is that what you're trying to tell me?
Yeah. 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 Well, that's one of the reasons that I started doing my meditations, is because I realized how much time I spent thinking about everything that I regretted and everything that I was worried about. I spent no time just enjoying the moment, just enjoying life, and realizing that in this moment, right now, I am safe. Even if I'm worried about other things, or if I felt pain a time ago, I'm safe right now.
Yeah. Yeah. Probably about half an hour about a half an hour ago, I got hooked. I got hooked on something that gave me the feels. And it's like, wow, that I haven't felt something like that for a long time. Do you ever get hooked, like something out there triggers something in you unexpectedly, and you're like, wow, I just gotta remember to take one day at a time.
You mean like get caught up and almost kind of in that whirlpool again?
Exactly.
That's a very good question. I think so. I have several different OCD tendencies, and something that I've learned about myself is to use things like that, things like my OCD tics, to quit or to jumpstart things or change things. Like, it was rehab itself was a monument enough that I kind of got it in my brain that I didn't want to mess that up. I didn't want to start drinking. And I think I got so afraid of getting on that whirlpool again, which is, real quick, I think that's a huge part that I don't know if people spend enough time talking about when it comes to addiction, is that you have to want it so bad that your subconscious wants it even when you don't. And so you have to experience enough negative consequences from this that your subconscious gets how negative this is too. So to try to decide for other people when they need to stop, it just doesn't do anything, because that person has to decide. And I think that rehab was the moment where I decided I need to stop. And I learned enough that I kind of got enough momentum. I did the 90 meetings in 90 days. I started crocheting a recovery blanket, which gave my hands something to do, filled my time. And just, to be honest, I think that I've had enough time away from it now that I honestly, I have drank a couple times in the 3.5 years that I've been sober, but each of those times was a very gentle reminder that even though nothing bad happened like it used to, it wasn't worth it. Like, it's not like I had such a great time that the risk was worth it, that the hangover, the recovery time, the week of depression after, that it just wasn't worth it. And so I haven't really, I'm too afraid of that whirlpool to let that start up again.
That's good. That's good. That's to have a healthy respect for that kind of whirlpool. Yeah. I've heard myself say this before, and it's part of this whole thing about being able to control what you can control. But there are times, and once again, difficult for me to really own this, to really wrap my mind and heart around this, is the other person just has to bottom out sometimes.
Yeah. And you don't get to decide for that person when bottoming out is.
No, just because you might have a high bottom, like I'm such an anxious ball of anxiety. Like, whenever I've even come close to maybe having a problem, I'm like, oh, well, this may not be good for me, But there are definitely, there are people with, just because you might have a bottom here doesn't mean you should be expecting other people to have the same bottom.
Well, there's some people who just have less experience near the bottom, that they just don't even recognize what the bottom is. So they have to spend enough time down there to be like, oh, this isn't actually just temporary, you know?
Right. This bottom that I'm at right now, this is baseline. This is just how things are.
Yeah.
And you know, it goes back to what you were saying about how you have to, there's part of you unconsciously that has to know this, that has to know it in your bones, right? And in your flesh, you know, in that kind of intimate way, you have to know that this isn't what you really should be about. This is not what you should be about. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, thanks for sharing that, Jenna.
Yeah.
Thanks for sharing that. Have you shared this advice with other people?
I try to share this with anybody who comes to me with questions about addiction or quitting or things like that. I try to be as generous with everything that I've learned without being forceful on anyone as possible.
Right. And I understand that. I can see how you don't want to ram it down people's throat, because once again, you're not in control of anyone else's behavior besides yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. This has been great. Fantastic. And I appreciate you sharing that. Definitely. A bunch of people in the chat. I just want to say hello to everyone. Thanks for sharing. Thanks for coming here and listening and watching and being part of this. I always enjoy the Best Advice Ever episodes. And yeah, it means I get a lot out of it personally, to tell you the truth. And I enjoy them. Jenna, what do you have? Is there anything else about this topic? Is there anything else that we haven't really addressed that you think that needs to be addressed?
Well, that I don't know that advice is the best way that I learn. That I think that I learn best by watching others. And so for example, like watching shows like this, like learning from the best advice ever from other people. So that's, as a kid, that's something that I would actually do, is I would, you know, what's the one thing that you regret the most? What's the one thing that you wish you would have known? And I'd be like, well, if that's the one thing in your entire life that you wish you would have known, I'm going to try to take that to consideration, you know?
Yeah.
So what I've tried to do is to ask for perspective, because I don't know, advice just seems so unwarranted most of the time. It feels like it just kind of gets wasted. You know?
Well, you know, yeah, it's whenever I even when a person asks me my advice, I will go in the back of my head going, they may not hear that. They may not hear this. They may not be able to incorporate this, but I'm going to give it my best shot.
Yeah. And you know, that's the thing, is that the person who gave me the advice to go to Al-Anon, that started all of this, is not a person I would ever really go to for advice. That's something else that I think is important, is that I realized that the best advice I ever got is from someone I wouldn't have asked for it from.
You know, that's what's interesting too, is that I've had a bunch of people on this show, and every once in a while, a significant amount of people say that exactly what you just said. There's like this advice that comes in, this information that comes in from unexpected sources. And just because it's a source that is unexpected, you should keep your ears open. You should keep your eyes open and be aware of that.
Yeah, I try to stop being so resistant to unwarranted. I'm typically the kind of person that's like, don't tell me what to do.
Oh. Yeah, one of my issues with I have issues with authority.
Yes.
There's no doubt about that. Yeah, so I can completely agree with that about someone just trying to force it down your throat. That is a guaranteed reason. That's a guaranteed way for me to get my defenses up, and for most people too. No one wants to feel like they're being spoon-fed stuff.
Well, a way I have found to give unwarranted advice in a way that it's not unwarranted, like, is, would you like to know what I would do?
Oh.
Because people like never say no.
Oh, that's clever, Jenna. That's a spice of magic right there.
Right. But then at that point you've piqued their interest at least.
Yeah. Well, that's really clever, to tell you the truth, because it opens up the conversation, doesn't it?
Yeah. And it shows that you actually care about what they want to know. Because they can say no. And if they do say no, then you can say, okay.
Right. Right. That's great. How did you learn that? Did you figure that out on your own?
I think that I've just been asking questions to so many people in so many places that I've kind of just discovered. I don't know if I discovered that or if I picked it up and incorporated it somewhere. I'm not sure anymore.
Well, I'm going to call that the Jenna Belk technique, to tell you the truth.
Oh.
I'm going to call that right now, the Jenna Belk technique.
I'm honored to own that technique because it works.
Excellent. Jenna Belk, thanks for coming on The Best Advice Ever. This has been really, really fun. And I hope people who are watching now have gotten something out of it, and people who come back to this episode later on will get something out of it. Where can people find you online?
YouTube and Twitch, also Facebook. I have a link tree, so if you're looking for any of my links, if you just go to linktr.ee/Jenna Belk, that'll pretty much bring you to all of my sources. But I wanted to say thank you so much for coming on and for joining us for the Ethan and Jenna show on Sunday and teaching us things actually from a mental health professional rather than just pure speculation.
Well, like you said, there is value in people's stories, whether or not they have a PhD or an MS or an MA or whatever. People have stories, and you can typically glean some kind of wisdom from them, one way or the other.
Yeah, I agree.
All right. Well, Jenna, take care. Everyone in the chat, take care. Be good. Be strong. We'll see you all again later. Take care. And thanks again, Jenna.
Thank you, Andy.